We are off, everyone. Welcome back. It's another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. We come to you on what is a rainy, dark Thursday for yours truly. I'm sure where Gyles is too. It's the same way, but the football season is right around the corner, so that puts a little pep in our step and brightens our day. And our series of evaluating every position on every roster in the NFC North continues. We're kind of getting close to the end now as we start to get a really good picture about each team's roster in the NFC North, and we want to see where the Vikings stack up and see if they have a shot to come away with the NFC North, or at least if the talent on their roster would suggest that they have a chance to capture the NFC North Championship once again. So that's what we're here to analyze and evaluate, and today our exercise takes us to the inside linebackers across the NFC North. We're excited to present our analysis and opinions and maybe prompt some ideas and some research in all of your brains as well. So to help me do all of this, of course, is my usual partner and my co-host, Gyles. Let's welcome him in right now and say hello. Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Hey, how we doing? Happy Wednesday. Excited to chat about middle linebackers. I mean, honestly, I think this is maybe one of the most underrated positions in all of football. I think a lot of people think about, middle linebackers, you have to have a guy out there, which in some ways, depending on your scheme, can be achieved more than others in some teams. But really an underrated position, and excited to chat through this because I think you can make an argument that there's quite a bit of talent across the entire NFC North. When you look at the highs and lows of different position groups, the NFC North is relatively stacked at interior linebackers. So excited to chat through this.
Yeah, interesting note, Gyles, because I think I've found myself in some of these positions that we've done feeling the opposite, where I feel like, man, that's maybe they're top heavy, but after that there's nothing, and sometimes they're not even top heavy and there's nothing after that. I tend to agree with you on the linebackers. I think there's some good players that we're going to talk about here today. And I think there's a team, I'm assuming, we don't always see eye to eye on everything, but we generally come out to the same understanding on stuff when we're talking about players. Mm-hmm. And a team comes out on top here that I don't know that they've come out on top in any other position. So
I would agree.
There's a little teaser for everyone. And so for those who have been along with us for all the other positions, you know the drill. For those who have not, and this is your first time checking out a Wobcast 2.0, or at least your first time in a while, we're going to take a look at the starters at every linebacker position for the Bears, and then the starters at every inside linebacker position for the Lions, Packers, and Vikings. Since they are in 3-4 groups and the Bears are in 4-3 groups, we're going to grade them on a scale, and then we're going to stack them up. And throughout that process, you'll hear our evaluation of every starter at inside linebacker for every team. And so we've done this for every position on the roster except for a few. We haven't gotten to the secondary yet. We have not done wide receivers or tight ends yet. Other than that, we're kind of getting to the end here, Gyles, and it's given us a really good picture of each team's roster. So I've spoken about how much I like doing this exercise and the reasons I like doing it, but I want to give you the floor. Is this an exercise you've enjoyed doing, and has it enlightened you to anything, or is it something that you'll want to do next year on the Wobcast 2.0 as we get ready for the 2024 season?
Yeah, 1,000%. Because when I think about football, I think sometimes, at least myself included, but a lot of people I know, we let emotion sometimes dictate our opinions on things like, I love this player, I hate this player. Our defense is bad or our defense is good. But taking a little bit of a step back and looking into the details, taking a quantitative and qualitative look at each position group to really get a holistic view on what's working, what's not, how do we fix it? When you're really trying to have a growth mindset and actually truly pursue a Super Bowl, what do we need to do in order to make that happen? And I think we've been going through all the most important positions in football and really identifying, especially in the NFC North, if you want to go chase a ring, you got to win your division, in my opinion. Outside of that, it's a pretty hair slim chance there. So when I think about going through the NFC North, really, really excited about this, and gives me a lot more optimism in some cases and a little bit more pessimism in others, areas that I think we need to really show up and show out when it comes to camp, and hopefully cross our fingers that we can improve in the right categories. But really love taking this systematic look.
All right, I do too. So let's get into it, and we'll start with the Chicago Bears. They are the outlier in this group, Gyles. As mentioned, they're in a 4-3 defense. The rest of the division is in a 3-4. So this is led by Alan Williams, the defensive coordinator. coordinating this defense, one time a Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator, and Allen is in the Tampa 2 family. So lots of cover 2 with 2 high safeties, middle linebacker dropping into coverage, and then the outside linebackers buzzing out to flats. So that's what the linebackers are asked to do a lot in this scheme, and that's what will be asked of them in 2023. So with this, we're going to be looking at a starting strong side, Sam linebacker, a starting middle or Mike linebacker, and then a starting will or weak side linebacker, and then one swing, one backup that we'll analyze. So we'll start with the Bears. We'll start at Sam linebacker, where they have a youngster by the name of Jack Sanborn, who debuted last year and not a high grade for the season, but did post a couple of strong games toward the end of the year. He saw increased action as the starting middle linebacker, Gyles, when they traded Roquan Smith to the Ravens. And that's where Sanborn really started to get some experience. You know, he's rugged and tough. He actually probably could play Sam linebacker for the Bears if they needed, if something happened to their starting middle linebacker. And so he's a guy who, although didn't start and play a lot early last year, got a lot more experience as the season went on, can also play on special teams. So he's not a household name, and there are better players at this position than him, but I actually gave him a pretty solid grade. I ended up with a 6 for Sanborn. I think he's a solid player that you can definitely get by with, and he's got a little bit of runway yet. I don't think we quite know who he is. The arrow is pointing up on Jack Sanborn. Middle linebacker, an absolute stud in Tremaine Edwards, who graded very high last year, free agent signing from the Buffalo Bills. So a pretty significant loss for the Bills. Now, the Bills have a great roster, and they've been good for a few years, and you can't keep everyone every year, and this is a guy that they ended up losing in Tremaine Edmonds. Really good player. They used him a lot more as a pass defender last year, Gyles, than Buffalo had in the past. He used to be a really heavy blitzer, and he didn't blitz so much last year. He ended up playing a lot of pass defense, and I would presume that this stood out to the Bears because they ask their Mike linebacker to cover a lot. They're going to be asking Edmonds to do just what they asked Brian Urlacher to do all of those years, which is to drop into coverage and essentially be a third safety in a lot of passing situations. And Edmonds has the skill set to do that. He demonstrated it last year. He has 5 career interceptions. Really high grade here for Edmonds. He's a stud. I don't know that there's another middle linebacker that you can make a strong argument for who's better in the NFL. There might be a couple, but I gave Edmonds a 9 out of scale of 0 to 10. The will linebacker, weak side linebacker, another really good player from another team, another really good team, and this is TJ Edwards. The Bears get him from the Philadelphia Eagles, another player with a high grade last year. A lot of articles I read, a lot of research I did, called him an unsung hero in the Eagles defense, a defense with a lot of names that we all know, but you might not know TJ Edwards' name too well. So an unsung hero, a 3-down linebacker, can do everything. They're going to ask Edwards to do what they asked Lance Briggs to do all of those years with Lovie Smith in Chicago when the Bears had really good defenses. So I gave him a pretty high grade as well. I gave him a 7. I leaned toward an 8 here for a while, Gyles, with Edwards, but I just want to see him do it for a new team, and I want to see him do it when there's not a bunch of other studs around him, which was the case in Philadelphia. So that's why I ended up on a 7 with him instead of an 8. And then we'll do one reserve for the Bears. I think you could go a number of different ways here. I ended up going with the draft pick from this season, Noah Sewell, 5th-round pick out of Oregon. Could compete with Sanborn for time at Sam. So that's something to watch, I think, for the Bears, although I think Sanborn will end up winning out. However, if something happens to Edmonds at Mike linebacker, I do think they'll move Sanborn to the middle, and then that Sam spot would open up, and I think Sewell is a candidate for that. Can't get too excited about him, though, because he's a rookie. He's never played in the league, so I gave him a 2 on a scale of 0 to 5. 6 for Sanborn, 9 for Edmonds, 7 for Edwards, 2 for Sewell, comes out to a 24.
Boom, look at you. Once again, a lot of similarities, just like week over week. Starting with Jack Sanborn. Love this guy. 22 years old, 6'2", 234 pounds from Wisconsin. Like you said, he's a draft pick out of 2022. Really excited about this prospect. Not necessarily as a Vikings fan, but as a football fan. This guy has a lot of potential. I did rate all of our interior linebackers across 5 separate categories. Overall PFF grade, run defense, coverage, tackling, and pass rush. And this guy was elite in should say he was approaching elite in a lot of different categories. I gave him a 7 out of 10. Ultimately, his data said 6 out of 10, but I bumped him up to a 7 because he was pretty premier in pass rush. The only category in which he wasn't amazing was run, but I see him improving, especially towards the latter half of the year. So I am going to give him a 7 with an upside of an 8. Really excited about this guy, period. I think the Bears have found a really good young player to fill in that position. Moving on to Tremaine Edmonds. Could not agree with you more. I think he's probably the best middle linebacker in football. He scored an 81.9 grade last year. This guy's elite from Virginia Tech, 25 years old, so he's not old. He's 6'5", 250 pounds. He was the 5th overall graded interior linebacker last year out of 111 qualified interior linebackers. He was the best coverage linebacker in football. He was ranked number 1 out of 111. Wow. He was top 20 in tackling, pass rush. His run defense was, I would say, middle of the pack, which is why I gave him a 9. I think there's a chance you could flirt with a 10 here if he could improve on the run defense, depending on if this scheme is a better fit for him than it was in Bills country. But I mean, he's awesome. Edmonds, I mean, if I could have him on the Vikings, I would give my left arm for it. Like, this is awesome. And then pairing him with TJ Edwards, I mean, the Bears are clearly doing something at the middle linebacker room when it comes to offseason additions and acquisitions. Another young guy at 26 years old, 6'1", 242 pounds, also from Wisconsin. He had an 81.6 grade last year. He was the 6th overall graded interior middle linebacker out of 111 qualified versions. Amazing at pass rush. He is top 10 or top 20 in most of the other categories, except for tackling. He's maybe top 3rd. But I gave him an 8. I think he could flirt with a 9 here, considering how good he is. But when you think about those 3 starting positions for the Bears, absolutely phenomenal. I think it's fair to say that they maybe have the best middle linebacker room in football this year. So it's something to keep an eye on if I'm game planning as the Vikings. So definitely important to note there. From my swing linebacker, I did pick Dylan Cole. He came from, I think he was in Tennessee last year before he was in Houston. I think he's, I would say, an average to slightly below average backup middle linebacker. I think he has spurts of greatness, but then also has a few valleys there. So I gave him a 3 out of 10, which brings my total score to 27 out of 35.
Yeah, a really good room here. As you mentioned, Gyles, it's revamped with the signing of Edmonds and Edwards, Sanborn, an undrafted free agent a year ago, now poised to start at Sam. So this is a room to be excited about for sure, and not a room that they were like, this room stinks last year. We got to go make it better. Let's go get a bunch of guys at the end of their careers who teams have jettisoned that we can get for cheap. No, they went and got good players like studs, and they're going to be able to execute the scheme that Matt Eberflus and Alan Williams want them to execute, which is that cover 2, Tampa 2 scheme. So Chicago Bears defense, historically very good, probably on the rise, and the heart and soul of that defense is this room. So impressive scores for the Bears. Let's move on to the Lions, Gyles. A team that is a very popular choice to win the division and do even more damage than that, whether you're talking about them being a betting favorite or a trendy team to talk about. So let's look at their inside linebackers. 3-4 defense here for the Detroit Lions, as we've analyzed, up front for them at the edge rushers and interior defenders. Lots of areas to improve for the Chicago Bears, and I think, or for the Detroit Lions, and I think this is one of them. They are coordinated by Aaron Glenn, a former defensive back in the National Football League. This is a team that did not do very many things well on defense. It did not do very many things well at linebacker. So lots of room to improve, and let's take a look at the guys who have the opportunity to generate that improvement. We'll start at left inside linebacker with Alex Anzalone, a guy who's been around for a long time, does not grade out very well ever, but kind of seems to be around the ball a lot. He's a leader. He's gritty, heart and soul of this defense. I think he was very much improved from 2021 to 2022, Gyles, but still not someone that you would characterize as a stud or someone that you got a game plan around. But he's been around the block. He knows how to play the position and play the game. I think by this time next year, the Lions probably are going to, they're hoping that he's been replaced by this time next year. But I think he can get them through and do the job for most of the 2023 season. So I gave him an 8 on a scale of 0 to 15 for these 3-4 inside linebackers. I gave him an 8. Next is Jack Campbell at the right inside linebacker position, a 5th-round pick last year. So, again, someone with some runway, young player who's got an opportunity to improve. Supposedly, he can cover really well, so we'll see how that plays out. He's got a lot of guys to cover in the NFC North, a position with a lot of good receivers and tight ends, so he will be tested in that regard this season. Detroit linebacker room was bottom 10 in coverage grade last year. So, in fact, I think they were even worse. They might have been the worst.
I believe they were 32nd, actually.
Yeah, so they were the worst. So this is where Campbell will add value as a coverage linebacker. He did a good job of that in college. We'll see if he can do it in the NFL. Up next is Rodriguez, who everyone called Rodrigo last year in Hard Knocks for the Detroit Lions. Fun story to watch. In Hard Knocks last year, a player that no one really was counting on, no one expected anything of him, and he really surprised and flashed in training camp on Hard Knocks and ended up being a really good player for them last year. He graded out just right around a 62 or a 63, I believe. Better run defender than he is in coverage, so where Campbell could excel, he'll cover up for maybe some of Rodriguez's flaws, and where Campbell may struggle to defend the run, I think Rodriguez can step in and do that. Instinctive player, quick player. So I gave Campbell a 7, by the way, on a scale of 0 to 15. I'm going to give Rodriguez a 4 on a scale of 0 to 5 as he's one of the reserve guys. I actually think Rodriguez could end up being a starter if they don't like what they see out of Campbell. If Anzalone gets hurt, they don't think he can run anymore. I think Rodriguez is a guy who could step in and start. And then I did another reserve, and that was Derek Barnes. 62 grade from last year. Much better running downhill, running after the ball, running to the ball than he is in coverage and in space. And his PFF grades would dictate that and would illustrate that. Not a very good grade in coverage, but pretty good grade as a rusher or blitzer, and then also against the run. Also a guy you can put on special teams if you need to. I gave him a 3 on a scale of 0 to 5. So 8 for Anzalone, 7 for Campbell, 4 for Rodrigo, 3 for Barnes. That comes out to 8 and 7 is 15 and 4 is 19 for the 3 main players, but I did a bonus guy in Barnes. I won't factor him into the grading. So Anzalone 8, 7 for Campbell, 4 for Rodriguez, and that's a 19 for the Lions.
Boom. There we go. Yeah, honestly, once again, a lot of similarities here, starting with Alex Anzalone, 28 years old, 6'3", 237 pounds from Florida. You could not have described this better. I think he is maybe the literal middle of the pack when it comes to middle linebackers in the NFL. Yeah. I will say he's never scored above a 70 his entire career. And at 28 years old, you're not necessarily young. I wouldn't say you're like on the doorstep of retirement necessarily, but you're definitely on the downward trajectory in terms of your career arc. And I think if I had to give him a grade, I'd give him here a 9 out of 15. He's about average to me, maybe a little bit better. I mean, he's not a train wreck in a lot of capacities. But he's a guy. I would venture to say, like you mentioned, that if we don't have a replacement as the Lions next year at this time, I think there's maybe something that went wrong, considering his age and his lack of upside. But, such is life with the Lions. And then moving over to Jack Campbell, I'm really excited about this guy. I think he graded last year at Iowa at a 91.9 overall grade. He was amazing in the run, amazing in tackling, amazing in coverage. I would say the only area that he had even a slight dip was in pass rush. But otherwise, I believe he was almost in the 80 or 90s for every other category. So this guy was pretty phenomenal at Iowa. Really excited about him. He's 6'5", 249 pounds. Anyone from Iowa, I think, is just tough. So excited to see what he plays with the Lions. Another addition to yet another an entirely stacked roster for the Lions. So I do give him technically a 10 out of 15 with an upside of maybe a 12 or a 13. I'm really high on this guy.
Nice.
But considering that he's never played in the NFL and he's a rookie, I'll give him a 10 out of 15. But I do think there's a considerable upside there. And then, like you mentioned, Malcolm Rodriguez, I'm really excited about him. I think he's a great locker room guy. On a scale of 1 to 5, I did give him a 4 out of 5. I do expect him potentially to take over Anzalone unless they draft somebody else, because I do think he is a guy that could take over both on and off the field activities. So for the Minnesota competitor known as the Lions, I'll give them a 23 out of 35.
Yeah, I think, with a couple of things here. Campbell is a really strong player and a guy who has a chance to be a stud. And the note I made about the room in general with the Lions, Gyles, was the room's ability to transcend where they rank now, which is worse than average, hinges on Campbell being a stud.
Absolutely.
And if that happens, the whole tenor shape of this room, I just feel differently about it.
Yes.
If that happens. If that doesn't happen, I think this room is poor. And they're in a little bit of trouble. So
actually, the worst in the NFC on paper currently.
Yeah.
If like you said, if Campbell shows up, I think they maybe be one of the towards the top end of the division. But yeah, they're definitely the worst in the room right now.
Yep. I know the Lions know that they need to be better on defense. This was an Achilles heel for them in general last year. With Campbell, they have a chance to do that. I think with Malcolm Rodriguez, what's interesting to watch for me there is, can the guy do it again, right? Because he had like a really impressive year right away, right out of the bat or right out of the gates. Can he do it again, though? Was that lightning in a bottle last year for him? Or is this something where he can really progress and be a really good player for them? So interesting to watch this room sort of develop this year. I think they have a chance to be good. Again, it hinges on Campbell. So let's go to the Green Bay Packers. I'm so accustomed to sort of dumping on the Packers defense over the years, that you kind of go into any position eval for them on defense, like ready to just be critical of it. But there's a couple of really good players here in this room that that are fun to talk about. So let's start with Devondre Campbell.
Yeah.
A semi-household name here in Minnesota, Gyles, because he played at the University of Minnesota and was a really good player for the Falcons right away and has been a good player for the Green Bay Packers. Pretty good grade last year from a PFF standpoint, although he did deal with a knee injury, saw a regression in production and grade because of that. But do remember, he was an All-Pro in 2021. I got an All-Pro behind me, too, by the way, if you haven't seen it.
What a stud.
Right there. Yeah. Okay. In 2021, he was an All-Pro, and he did everything well that year. And that's what Green Bay needs him to be this year. And so I think when Devondre Campbell is playing his best, he's an 11. So I got him at an 11 here on a scale of 0 to 15, a really good player. And when we talked at the jump of the episode about, wow, there's some really good players in the NFC North in this position, Devondre Campbell's at the heart of that. I think he's really good for Joe Barry's defense, that 3-4 scheme, athletic, can run, can cover. I think he's a leader. I think he's tough. So really a good player. And he may not grade from a PFF standpoint or from like a scout's evaluation standpoint as high as Tremaine Edwards or as Tremaine Edmonds would, but I would say the same thing about Campbell that I would about Edmonds, where I think every linebacker room in the NFL would take Campbell. Really good player. So he gets an 11. Quay Walker. Now I ended up, when the evaluation is done on Quay Walker, I end up in a really similar place, but I get there a different way with him.
Okay.
I think Campbell is an all-around really good player who's solid, reliable, and I'm pretty sure he's, like, I have him at 11. It might be a 10, might be a 12, but it's going to be around an 11. With Walker, I think it's more peak and valley, and I think he's heavy at what he's good at, and there are some things he's really not good at all, and he's got to bring – I'm more focused on him bringing his floor up than I am on him raising his ceiling. He's also an emotional player. He got ejected twice out of games last year, including the the do or die game against the Lions at the end of the season. He got thrown out of that game. So, but this guy fills up the stat sheet. He had 121 tackles and 7 pass breakups last year. So not great against the run, super athletic, good in space, and I have a hunch that he can be a really good pass rusher. So I think this guy is a handful. Brad Childress once described a running back, I think it might have been Adrian, as a rolling ball of butcher knives. And I think Quay Walker is a rolling ball of butcher knives, man. He's hard to handle when he's playing really well. I gave him an 11 as well. And then finally, Isaiah McDuffie. After being so excited about Devondre Campbell and Quay Walker, it's hard to be excited about Isaiah McDuffie. Depth guy, on a scale of 0 to 5, I gave him a 3. Standard depth guy. He can compete at a couple of positions. Multi-phase special teams guy, so he does have that going for him, but I don't factor that into the evaluation of him as an inside linebacker. It just gives him some value on the roster overall. I think Green Bay would be in trouble if they needed McDuffie to play more than a game or two. But if they need him to come in for a series to give someone a rest, I think they're fine. Anything more than that, I think they're in trouble. But at the end of the day, they got 2 11s in Campbell and Walker, and they got a 3 in McDuffie. That comes out to a 25, which is a pretty solid grade.
Yeah, phenomenal. Honestly, once again, we have some areas of similarity, starting out with Devondre Campbell. Honestly, this is one of my favorite players in the Packers. I never thought I'd say that out loud, just about any Packers players in general. But this guy's 30 years old, which is honestly one of his only biggest downsides is that he's getting a little bit old. But he's 6'3", 232 pounds. Like you mentioned, he's from Minnesota. He ended up with a 75.6 grade last year, 81 in coverage. This guy's phenomenal in coverage. He was basically top 5 in coverage. He was the 19th best middle linebacker in football last year. This guy has so many different areas that he can affect the passer, affect the back end of the football. I would say run is maybe the only area in which he's a little bit deficient. He technically rated a 60.3. So ultimately, I did give him a 12 out of 15. I gave him a high grade. I do think that could become a 13 if he was better at the run, or if he was a little bit younger. But I think this guy's a solid starting middle linebacker. Really, really excited about him.
Yep.
And then moving over to Quay Walker, this guy I have mixed feelings about, because when I went into this exercise, I was expecting to find a lot better performance because I had a higher opinion of him in my head. I view him as a very I guess emotional player is the right term, but someone that has a lot of gumption to go after the football, and I really like that in a middle linebacker, a little bit mean. Yeah. Ultimately, he's 23 years old, 6'5", 241 pounds. This guy is still just ended his rookie year, and I hope that a lot of the issues that came up during this past season were just that, rookie issues. But he was average in some categories, which I did not expect. He was great in pass rush. He was basically top 20 in the NFL, top 20 in coverage. The run is where he severely struggled. I think, like you mentioned, there were some issues there on the field. So hopefully he can improve that, because he ended the year at a 34.9 run grade, which is abysmal. Yep. And considering his high draft pick, he was, 20th overall in the 2022 draft. So all that to say, I did give him a 10 out of 15. If he's not able to clean some of those things up, I would maybe knock him down to a 9. But if he's able to actually take a step forward out of his rookie year and realize his true potential, raise that floor, I would be willing to give him 11 or a 12.
Okay.
So that kind of rounds out the starting element. And then for McDuffie, Isaiah McDuffie, I agree. He's a guy. He had some peaks and valleys. He had games last year that he played, which he scored a 90 grade. There was 2 separate games that he was in the 90s, but he also had some games in the 30s. So this guy has a level of volatility that I don't love for a middle linebacker. I really went back and forth on whether to give him a 3 or a 2, but I did bump him up to a 3 because he did have some elite level play, which brings the entire Packers room to a 25 out of 35.
Yeah, I think your comments on Walker are good and right. I'm high on him, and I think you see the high side of him as well. Mm-hmm. But we don't want to discount what brought him down. You can't just be a one-trick pony. We have him graded high. I have him as an 11, and you just can't be a one-trick pony and get a high grade. You got to be an all-around player, and he's got a lot to prove in that regard. But the upside with him is so high, and so I think he's the key. We kind of identified key players for each team in their room to turn that room into a really good room. And I think for Green Bay, it's Quay Walker for sure.
Yeah.
All right,
he's a bulldog.
Yeah, that's right.
From Georgia.
Do they turn out enough good players or not?
Oh, my goodness.
Holy moly. Jeez.
Something in the water down there.
Like Alabama used to do and still does.
Yeah, seriously.
The Vikings linebacker room could use one or two of those players because we're going to talk about them next. And there's something to be excited about in this room. But that's something we'll talk about. Other than that, though, I don't think there's a lot to be excited about in the Vikings room. Maybe you'll disagree with me, but let's start with Jordan Hicks. I remember during the season last year, Gyles, you and I talked about Hicks and Kendricks quite a bit, and I always ended up sort of being okay with Hicks because I thought he brought a lot of intangible quality to the room and leadership and just knowing where to be and when to be there. That can only get you so far, though. Mm-hmm. And they bring Hicks back, and he'll provide those things once again. You know, I don't want to call his grade a mid-grade. It's a little bit better than that. But a guy I think Jordan Hicks, I think, is a little bit better than Alex Anzalone, but I'll say the same thing about him. I'll say the same thing about Hicks that we said about Anzalone. I think next year at this time, you want to be better here. You want to have moved on and upgraded here. For now, though, the Vikings have Hicks in this spot at left inside linebacker. I gave him an 8. I think you can get by with him for a season, but if you really want to go next level as a defense, there are some places where you got to get way better, and this would be a candidate to be one of those places. Mm-hmm. So he gets an 8. Let's move on, though, to Brian Asamoah, another player that we talked a lot about last year, Gyles, and you were very high on him, and I jumped on board with you eventually and got there myself. A guy with great athletic traits. I think he's instinctual. I think he loves to be around the ball. But a guy that doesn't have a ton of experience, and you can't knock him for that because you don't get experience until they put you in the game. Well, the Vikings are going to put Asamoah in the game this year. He's going to be a starter at right inside linebacker. And I think just as the Lions inside linebacker room's ability to be a great room hinges on Jack Campbell, the same will be said about the Vikings and Brian Asamoah. I gave him a 9. I think he's got the upside here to be above a 10, to be up there at 11 or 12. I love his pedigree background, the way he was brought up, Gyles, as a special teams player. I think there are so many examples of defensive players who ended up being really good starters who began as special teams players, running down on kickoff, covering kicks, making tackles, toughing it out, and then they get into a role as a starting defender, and that's Brian Asamoah's career arc. So I really like that about him. I gave him a 9. And then we'll go to a reserve inside linebacker. I have a feeling you're going to go with someone else. I went with Troy Dye, which I think is predictable, boring, standard, and he gets a 1 on a scale of 0 to 5. So I didn't do the Vikings any favors here by going with Dye, because where you could give this position a 2 or a 3 or a 4 based on some upside, you lose that when you do Troy Dye, because there's really not a lot of upside here. He's just a reliable guy that you could throw in there, and it's not going to be a disaster. But I think you're going to do someone else. I think you're going to do a younger player who's got a lot of upside and a player who could actually be a starter before the season is over. I think that's who you're going to do here, but I did Dye, and I gave him a 1. So 8 for Hicks, 9 for Asamoah, 1 for Dye. That comes out to an 18.
There we go. Honestly, this is the area where I think we maybe diverge a little bit. And I think the Vikings maybe have the most interesting middle linebacker room, both in the NFC North and maybe the NFL, considering what I think they will do in 2022, or 2023 rather, because I don't think it's what most people think. And hear me out here. So we're going to start off with Jordan Hicks. Okay. Obviously, he's 31 years old, 6'1", 236 pounds. He's a big dude. He's from Texas, drafted in 2015. This guy is elite at the things that he is elite at, and he is poor at the thing that he is poor at. Ultimately, he was the 41st overall ranked middle linebacker in football out of 111 inside linebackers. He was essentially top 10 in run and top 10 in tackling. This guy, against the run, Jordan Hicks, I mean, there's not too many players that are better than him. He's phenomenal at that. Was pretty decent at pass rush. He was, top 20, top 25. Coverage and speed, that is not his shtick. This guy is not a fast player. This is not a guy that you want to back off into coverage. This is a guy you want to do to stop the run. So if you're thinking about short down coverages, this is where I would put him in. Now, technically, he's at this, this outside or the middle linebacker position in the starting role. I think there's a chance, I'll get to this here in a second, but I think there's a chance that maybe they move him to more of a rotational player and put him in specifically for rundowns because this guy's phenomenal. When you think about stopping the run, I think he has an amazing utility there. I think, I'll get into it in a second, but I think there's some opportunity for him to be a rotational player. But I did give him a 10 out of 15, considering his amazingness in the run game. He obviously could be higher if he was better in the pass, but ultimately I gave him a 10 out of 15. And then moving over to the other side at Brian Asamoah, I was already pretty decently high on Brian Asamoah, and then after looking into his numbers, I'm even higher on him. Okay. He's 23 years old, 6 foot even. And he's 226 pounds. Now, some people might call me foolish here, so hear me out here. But he's actually the smallest middle linebacker in the entire NFC North. This guy is short, and he is small. But he is incredibly fast. I mean, incredibly fast. And I think there's a pretty big portion of Vikings fans that think like, oh, he played a few snaps, and well, I guess we'll see this year. He played 1 snap less than 20% of snaps. He was at 19.75% of snaps for the entire season last year, which isn't 100, to be very, very clear, but it's also not nothing. I think there was a decent sample size to be able to get a good picture of what he was. And out of those 19.75% of snaps, if you include all those players, which is 111 of them, he was the 13th best middle linebacker. He was almost top 10. He was 11th in coverage. He did have some issues with tackling, which obviously you're going to find with a small middle linebacker. Yep. When you look at the stats, unlike a lot of the other players, he was essentially at the bottom for pass rush, but he only had 3 pass rush snaps the entire season. So he didn't rush the passer at all. So I think it's potentially unfair to grade him against pass rush because he simply didn't do it. He was primarily a coverage linebacker. He was top 30 in run defense. Considering that he was top 30 in run defense and he was only 226 pounds, I mean, he is 20 pounds lighter than other linebackers in the NFL. This guy actually did pretty well. So that being said, if he can improve some of his tacking elements and actually take a further step forward, I mean, it was his rookie year this last year. If he can take a true step forward and actually be a true starting linebacker, I think there's some upside here. I gave him a 12 out of 15, but I do think there's an upside of a 13. I mean, this is a hot take. I do recognize this, but I think he'd be a Pro Bowl player this year.
Wow. Yeah.
I think he is phenomenal. He's from Oklahoma. Got to love those flyover states there. I'm really high on Brian Asamoah. I love his speed, which directly translates into my swing linebacker position here. I picked Ivan Pace Jr., the undrafted free agent. Yeah, now, some people are going to call me absolutely crazy that I'm a homer, that I have, purple-colored glasses on here. But hear me out here. Yep. So when I think of Ivan Pace Jr., I mean, he's 22 years old. He is 5'10". He is less than, he's literally my height. He's less than 6 foot tall, and he's 231 pounds. This guy is small. And out of every analysis that I've seen on this guy, the only reason that he didn't get drafted pretty early in the draft, not even, even just drafted period, but early in the draft, was because he was way too small for a middle linebacker. People were terrified of his size, and that he had a ton of penalties when he played for Cincy, which he definitely did. He had a lot of penalties. This guy is an aggressive player, which is something I really like in a middle linebacker. So I think if you pair that with Brian Flores' teaching ability, it's a big if, but if I actually think you could turn this guy around and clean up some of his penalty issues. I don't think his size is an issue. I think people are way more terrified of it than they should be. Now, if he didn't have his versatility and athleticism, it'd obviously be an issue. But this guy, he ranked towards the top in all middle linebackers in all of the NCAA last year. He had a 93.2 grade. He was in the 90s for run, in the 90s for pass rush. He was almost in the 80s for tackling. He was in the 70s for coverage. This guy is a great middle linebacker if his size can truly translate to the NFL. So if you're looking at what the Vikings are doing here across the entire team, but specifically on defense, they are getting younger and faster. And when I think about speed, like I mentioned before, Jordan Hicks is not necessarily that great at the run. If they can bring him in rotational space, I think there's a phenomenal opportunity there. But I think for passing downs, I think they're going to put in Ivan Pace Jr., and they're going to have tremendous speed at the linebacker position. Between Brian Asamoah and Ivan Pace Jr., you could make an argument that they're the fastest middle linebacker room in football if that's what they put on the field.
Yep. I like your approach to this, Gyles, and I like the Vikings' approach to the inside linebacker room, too, when all is said and done. And they may not grade out favorably compared to other teams, or in your case, they might. But in one's case, like mine, they might not. But in a league that is certainly a matchup league, especially on third down, you have to like this approach that the Vikings are taking to the room, because they're not looking like with the Chicago Bears, with Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, two players who they just signed in free agency who are pretty good or great at everything you could ask of a linebacker. Okay, so that's great. The Vikings don't have one guy even close to that, but what they do have is guys who are great, pretty good or great at something, right? And so as a coaching staff, you know what those things are, and you insert a combination of players at that position who can do what you need them to do at that down and distance at that stage of the game.
Yes.
That's where the matchups come in. And that's the Vikings' approach, I believe, at this position. And I think it's not an approach they're taking in resigned fashion because they just can't get any good players. I think it's an approach they've intentionally taken to this position. And I have a feeling it could be something that Kevin O'Connell is intentionally doing, because he's like, as a former quarterback, as an offensive guy, he's like, I know this is a matchup league. I know what offenses are trying to do. And so when I look at it through that prism, I want my defense to be able to do this in response to what an offense might be trying to do to them. And rather than asking the same guys to do a lot of different things, they're asking guys to just do what they're good at. On this down and distance. And if the next down and distance, they don't need a bunch of guys in pass coverage, they need a bunch of thumpers to come play against the run, they'll put Jordan Hicks back in, and maybe they'll put Troy Dye in or whoever. You know, so I do like that approach and appreciate that approach. It's different than what the Bears are doing. It's different than what some other teams might be doing, but I think it makes sense, especially in a league that is so pass happy and is so matchup oriented. Do you follow all that? I don't know.
No, we're speaking the same language. I'm really excited about what that opportunity looks like. And I know I've said this before, I'll say it again. I'm really excited to see what this looks like under Brian Flores, because he's such a versatility guy where you could make an argument that Brian Asamoah and Ivan Pace Jr. are pseudo safeties in some respects.
Yes,
so I think you might see some rotational elements here that are going to be difficult to pick up, at least early on in the season. Really excited to see what that looks like. Players that have a lot of versatility. Different than what you said, like the Bears are doing, but really excited to see what he puts on the field.
So the caveat to that, Gyles, is if you have this rotational situation and the guys all stink, it doesn't matter. But like if you have a rotational situation and the guys are good and they execute well, it's a pain in the ass for the other team's coaches and quarterback, because it's like you got to know their numbers and what they do well. And when this combination is in, this is what they tend to do on third down. But on third down, when that combination is in, they tend to do this instead. And it's a headache, and you got to draw up the schemes on the cards and show it to your scout team in practice and run a lot of different plays. And so if the guys are good, it's a cool approach that adds a level of complexity to the offense preparing. And anytime you're adding complexity to what the other team tries to do, you increase the chance that they're going to screw up, right? So, but again, the caveat is if all the guys don't play well, then the trick is up. The trick's over. So the guys got to be good at it. And so I think when you look at, now we come higher level and look at the whole division. For me, The inside linebacker position group, it's neck and neck between Green Bay and Chicago, and Green Bay edges out ahead of them. I think for you, I believe if I followed, you had the Bears atop this division.
Yes.
So either way, we both had a new team coming out on top of a position. For me, it's the Bears. Or for you, it's the Bears, and for me, it's the Packers. You have a little bit more of an optimistic outlook for the Vikings. I'm a little bit more pessimistic, but you kind of got me excited about it the way you talked about it. And I do appreciate the approach. I just want to see it happen before I get too high on it. And then I think we kind of settled on Detroit sort of being middle of the road, and it sort of hinges on Jack Campbell. So at the end of the day, though, and I'll let you comment on this as well, I think you just look at the landscape of the inside linebacker position in the North, and you got a lot of good players.
100%. And a lot of people can call a middle linebacker position kind of the quarterbacks of football, the people that like call things out during the middle of the plays on defense. And I think the NFC North are going to be definitely teams to beat. I'm really high in the Lions this year, although they maybe are a little bit less than what the Bears are in terms of middle linebacker play, at least potentially. They do have some upside, and I'm just really excited about them as a team. So I'm really excited to see what they put on defense, because I think their offense will still be at least top 5, top 10 next year. And if they can improve on defense, they're really going to be a team to beat. I think the Bears, although I'm not high on Justin Fields, I think the Bears have done a lot of good things on defense. Where I think they're not going to be a train wreck anymore. They're not going to be a number 1 overall pick type player or type team. Not going to say they're going to go win the Super Bowl here, but I definitely think they're going to take tremendous steps forward if they can put it all together. So really excited about that. I think the Packers. I'm not feeling great about the Packers. I think they have some elements of good play, but I feel like they're kind of on the wind down right now. But we'll see. But obviously the Vikings, if they're able to keep Danielle Hunter, I think I've said this all offseason. If they're able to keep Danielle Hunter, I'm really expecting them to take a pretty massive step forward as a team, especially on defense, but as a team as a whole. I'm really expecting them to take some strides here. So if Danielle Hunter is at training camp and ready to roll, I expect that'll have tremendous impacts here on this middle linebacker room.
Yeah, and I think where the Vikings are the strongest is going to be on offense and putting pressure on all these defenses, throughout in the NFC North and some of these players that we've talked about the last few weeks as we've done our position evals. But we're going to flip the script a little bit next week. I think we should go to the wide receiver position and evaluate that across the NFC North. And that's an area, obviously, where the Vikings stand a pretty good chance to be up there atop the NFC North with their wide receiver group. So let's do that next week, see where all the NFC North teams stack up with each other at the wide receiver position as we sort of are winding down here. After we're done with wide receivers, we'll have tight ends and then the secondary to get to. So, and it's appropriate that we're winding it down because training camps are going to be starting here before you know it. Before we go and wrap this up, I got 2 things I want to get to with you, Gyles.
Let's do it.
I want to do a heat check on Dalvin Cook back to the Vikings. We've talked about this the last few weeks. You were the first one to mention it to me as a possibility that, hey, Dalvin Cook's still a free agent, but what if he ended up back in Minnesota? And then I heard Kirk Cousins say it out loud at mandatory minicamp. And then I saw the possibility floated that Zeke Elliott returns to the Cowboys. Could Dalvin Cook also return to the Vikings? So heat check, Gyles. Where are you at on this? Is it still possible?
Honestly, the fact that he hasn't signed a deal in Miami makes this even more plausible in my head, because that was the only real possibility that I thought could happen here with Dalvin Cook, considering that he's from Miami, loves the Miami area, that he just simply wants to go back home. Yep. And strong reports say that they offered, I don't know what the exact amount is, but north of $7 million, and he said no. So that tells me that if he hasn't said yes to that, I don't know if Miami's going to happen. And I think he's such a strong locker room guy. I mean, you've been in the room. There's a chance that maybe he's the most respected and well-liked person in that building. So unless something has happened that has not been reported that has changed that type of relationship dynamic, I'm even more on high on him coming back. Now, I think in terms of, looking at this from a sheer numbers and cap standpoint, I don't know if I love redirecting some cap space back to the running back room, especially considering the middle linebacker room, looking at the NFC North. That's going to be tough from a run game standpoint. But honestly, I'm becoming even more high that he'll come back to the men in purple.
That'd be a win for the Vikings for sure, from a negotiating standpoint, from a financial standpoint, but from a talent on the field standpoint too. That'd be a big win for the Vikings. Okay. Lastly, before we go, also a big win for the Vikings, the throwback uniforms they unveiled. I believe they unveiled it yesterday.
Yes.
Tuesday. Today's Wednesday as we record this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. I liked them too. It's paying homage to like the 60s and 70s with a little touch of the 80s in there. Very cool throwback uniforms that they'll be wearing in week 1 of the season against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Why don't the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wear their throwbacks too? Put those road orange creamsicle uniforms on. The creamsicle pants with the white tops for the Bucs and the old orange Buccaneer on the side of their helmet.
Yep.
Throw us back to the 90s. Totally. How about that? Huh?
Baker Mayfield shows up. Yeah, 100%. And I'm a big jersey guy. I love jerseys. I'm really excited about this. I love the concoction that they put together. Honestly, when I think about all the different uniforms, the throwback ones, Vikings have to be towards the top of the list across the entire NFL. I think current uniforms, I'm also a big lover of the Vikings. They think they have a really sharp set. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, Los Angeles Chargers are maybe my favorite.
Yeah.
We just hired a new head of syndications, Jacob, and he's like, I want to go to the Chargers game just to see these uniforms. So we're going to go this year just to check them out. Love the jerseys for the Chargers. But if you're thinking throwback, I think the Vikings have some of the best.
Yep, pretty fun. Lots of teams going retro and unveiling throwback uniforms this season. The Vikings jumped into the fray, and they jumped into the fray in impressive fashion. So encourage you guys to go find that on the internet if you have not already, and excited to see what other kind of gear will be available by different companies. UNRL does a great job with a lot of their gear. I'm sure they're going to have some sort of product that they'll launch in relation to the retro uniforms that the Vikings will be wearing in week 1 this season. So excited to see all of that. And football season, definitely, it's not just right around the corner, man. I mean, my body clock, I did it for 15 years, and my body's telling me it's time to go. I'm sure yours is the same way. Yeah, football season is here. So exciting time to be a fan of the game.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. Honestly, I think if we are able to reach an extension, I might go get a Hawkinson jersey if we can get these throwbacks. I'm really, really high on him as a player. Love his addition to the Vikings. I think he's exactly what we want a Minnesota Viking to be. Yes. And I just love those throwback jerseys.
Yep, I do too. Hawkinson will be a key player. We'll talk about him in the tight end position group here in a couple of weeks. We'll talk about wide receivers, though, next week. So make sure you tune in next week to the Wobcast 2.0 as we continue our exercise of evaluating every position on every team in the NFC North to see where the Minnesota Vikings stack up. Today we did inside linebackers. This episode is over. The next one we'll do is the wide receivers, so we hope you check it out. Make sure you find the Wobcast 2.0 wherever you find and subscribe to all your other favorite podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. You can also find us and watch us on YouTube, so if you're not doing that, we encourage you to do so. You can always interact with us on social media as well. We love when fans dictate the content and the things we talk about because we're here to talk about football and entertain you all. So make sure you interact with us on social media as well. That's going to do it for this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. On behalf of my co-host and partner, Gyles, I'm Wobby signing off for now. Until next time, Skol Vikings.